Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, let me know, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? I really enjoy reading those comments. Just so you know, this story slowly builds. The longer you listen, the more uncomfortable it becomes, especially near the end. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, liking the video and subscribing really helps me keep making more. All right, let's begin.
I'm going to tell this straight, the way I'd tell it to someone who asked me quietly, maybe over a late phone call. I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm just done pretending it didn't happen. This took place about 8 years ago. In late October, when the mountains were already losing their color and the nights came early, I had just gotten out of a rough breakup and needed space. I was living in North Carolina at the time, working a remote IT job, and I decided to take a week off and drive west into the Appalachians. No big plan, just me, my old Tacoma, and a cabin I found online that was cheap and far enough away from everything to feel like a reset. The listing said the place was outside a town called Laurel Fork. No photos of the surrounding area, just the cabin itself. 1 bedroom, wood, stove, no cell service. That last part actually sold me on it. The drive up there was normal. Long stretches of road with nothing but trees and rock walls. The GPS lost signal about 20 minutes before I arrived, but I had printed directions like an adult who pretends he's prepared. I followed a state highway until it narrowed into a county road, then a gravel road, then something that barely deserved to be called a road at all. When I finally reached the cabin, it was already getting dark. It looked exactly like the photos. Small, clean, old, but maintained. 1 porch light hanging over the door, casting that weak yellow glow that doesn't really help you see anything beyond what's right in front of you. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet. Not the kind with crickets or wind or distant traffic. Just blank. Like the sound had been turned down instead of off. I remember standing there with my door open, engine off, listening, waiting for something. A bird leaves. Anything, nothing came. I shrugged it off. Mountains do that sometimes, I told myself. Weather pressure, elevation. I grabbed my bag and went inside. The cabin smelled like dust and old wood. Not bad, just unused. There was a guest book on the small table by the door. I flipped through it out of boredom. Most entries were short. Dates, names, great stay, loved the quiet, things like that. A few pages toward the back were torn out. I noticed it, but didn't think much of it. That first night was uneventful. I made a simple dinner, lit the stove, read for a bit. No phone signal, no internet, just silence and the crackle of the fire. I slept hard. The second day was when things started to feel slightly off, but nothing I could point to. I went for a hike in the morning. There was a narrow trail behind the cabin that looked like it had been used recently, though I hadn't seen another car anywhere nearby. I walked for maybe an hour, enjoying the cold air, the smell of damp leaves. I did notice something strange though. The farther I walked, the more the forest felt. Organized, that's the only word I have for it. Trees spaced evenly. Underbrush cleared in odd patches. Rocks stacked in places that didn't look natural. Not cairns exactly, just piles. Like someone had moved them out of the way and never bothered to put them back properly. I assumed it was old logging activity or trail maintenance. Appalachia is full of old human marks if you know how to look. When I turned back toward the cabin, I realized I had been walking downhill the entire time. That didn't make sense. The cabin sat in a small valley. I should have had at least some uphill coming back. Still, when I retraced my steps, I reached the cabin faster than I expected. I checked my watch. I'd been gone almost 2 hours. I figured I'd misjudged the terrain. It happens. That evening, I noticed footprints near my truck. Not fresh mud prints. Just impressions in the gravel, like someone had walked around the vehicle, stopped near the driver's side, then wandered off toward the trees. They weren't mine. The tread pattern didn't match my boots. Again, I explained it away. Maybe the property owner, maybe a hiker passing through. I hadn't locked the truck, and nothing was missing. That night, I heard footsteps on the porch, not pacing. Just a slow, deliberate walk from one end to the other. Heavy enough to make the boards creak, but not rushed. Whoever it was didn't knock. Didn't test the door, just walked, stopped, walked again. I stayed in bed, heart thudding, telling myself it was probably an animal. A bear, maybe. Or a deer, even though I'd never heard a deer walk like that before. When I finally worked up the nerve to look out the window, the porch was empty. The third day, the cabin door was unlocked when I woke up. I know I locked it. I always do. Habit drilled into me from years of city living. Nothing inside was disturbed. My things were exactly where I left them. The fire was out, cold ash in the stove. But the door was open, just a crack, letting in the morning air. I told myself I must have forgotten. Stress does that. Breakups do that. But I started paying closer attention. That afternoon, I drove into Laurel Fork to pick up groceries. The town was smaller than I expected. One gas station, one diner, a handful of houses scattered along the road. At the gas station, the attendant barely spoke. Older guy, grey beard. He rang me up without looking at me, then finally asked where I was staying. When I told him, his hand paused on the register. "You up on Old Switchback?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then he handed me my receipt and said, "Don't wander at night." That was it. No explanation, no warning tone. Just a statement. At the diner, the waitress asked the same question. When I gave the same answer, she smiled tightly and changed the subject. I drove back to the cabin with the radio off, listening to the road noise, trying to shake the feeling that I was being talked around instead of talked to. That evening, the sounds started again. Not footsteps this time. Something farther out. In the trees. Movement. Slow, intentional. Always just beyond. Where the light reached, I turned on every exterior light the cabin had. It didn't help much. Around midnight, I heard voices, not words. Just murmuring. Low, more than one. Coming from different directions. I told myself it was wind in the trees. Except there was no wind. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I decided to leave early. Cut the trip short. No shame in trusting your instincts. That's when I realized my truck wouldn't start. Battery was dead, which made no sense. It was new. I hadn't left anything on. When I popped the hood, I found the battery cables loosened. Not disconnected, just loose enough to fail. That's when the rational explanations started falling apart. Someone had touched my truck. I packed my things fast. Decided to hike back toward the road if I had to. The map said it was only 5 miles. I followed the trail behind the cabin again. After an hour, I realized I was seeing the same rock pile I'd passed earlier, same shape, same moss. I kept walking. Another hour, same tree with a lightning scar down its side. My watch said I'd been walking for nearly 4 hours. My legs burned. My throat was dry. The forest never changed. I tried to go off trail. Within minutes, I hit thick brush that felt almost intentionally placed. Thorns, fallen logs. Terrain that pushed me back the way I came. When I turned around, I saw them. People standing far apart, half hidden behind trees. Watching, they didn't move, didn't wave, didn't speak. There were at least 6 of them. I ran. I don't remember the path back. I just remember bursting out of the trees and seeing the cabin like it had been waiting for me. The door was open. Inside, the guest book was on the table. Open new writing filled the torn-out pages. Dates, names. My name was there. That night was a blur of fear and noise and pounding on the walls. Shadows passing the windows. Hands on the glass. Always slow. Always patient. Near dawn, the sound stopped. I sat on the floor until daylight, gripping a kitchen knife like it mattered. When the sun came up, my truck started on the first try. I didn't pack. I didn't look back. I drove straight through Laurel Fork without stopping. I reported it later. To who, I don't even know. Rangers, local police. Nothing came of it. No record of the cabin rental. No owner. No listing. The road to it doesn't show up on maps anymore. I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear footsteps on my porch, and I don't camp alone anymore. If you ever find a cheap cabin in the Appalachians that promises total isolation, ask yourself why. Some places don't want witnesses. Some places just want time. And some places are very good at keeping what wanders in. I never planned on going back into the Appalachians after what happened the first time. I told myself it was a one-off experience. Bad luck mixed with isolation and my own head getting the better of me. That explanation worked for a while. Years, even. Then my father died. He'd lived alone for most of my adult life. Way out in eastern Kentucky, in a place so remote that people from the nearest town called it up the spine. That was their term for the ridge that ran behind his property, cutting deep into the mountains where roads turned to dirt and then stopped pretending to be roads at all. We weren't close. Not hostile, just distant. He was a quiet man who believed privacy was a kind of virtue and silence a form of discipline. When he passed, the county sheriff called me because there was no one else to call. I flew in, rented a car, and drove 4 hours through winding mountain roads that narrowed and rose until my ears popped and the radio faded into static. The sheriff met me at the bottom of the ridge and followed me up the last stretch because, as he put it, most folks don't like driving it alone their first time. That should have been my warning. The house sat in a shallow cut between 2 wooded slopes, barely visible from the road. It was smaller than I remembered. Sagging porch, tin roof dulled by rust. The windows looked dark even in the afternoon light. The sheriff stayed just long enough to explain the paperwork and hand me a sealed envelope. "Your dad asked that this be given to you if anything happened," he said. He didn't look at me when he spoke. Inside the envelope was a single key and a folded piece of paper. On it, in my father's handwriting, were 4 words. "Do not go uphill." I assumed it was some kind of joke, or a warning about unstable ground. My father was practical like that. I stayed the first night without issue. The house creaked the way old houses do. Wind rattled the trees. I slept on the couch because his bedroom felt too personal, like an intrusion. The second night, I heard footsteps outside, not around the house. Above it, the ridge behind the property rose steeply, dense with trees and rock. No trail. No reason for anyone to be up there, especially after dark. The steps were slow, measured, crunching leaves, careful not to slip. I told myself it was a deer, or someone hiking through private land. But the sound didn't wander. It paced back and forth, like someone deciding something. When I stepped onto the porch with a flashlight, the sound stopped. The beam cut into the trees, but didn't reach far. The forest swallowed it whole. I noticed then how sharply the tree line started. No gradual thinning, just darkness pressing close, like the woods had leaned in. The third day, I started going through my father's things, drawers, boxes, old notebooks filled with dates and short, clipped notes. Most of it was mundane, weather supplies, repairs. Then I found pages where the handwriting grew tighter, almost frantic. They don't like noise. They don't like light. Uphill they move when watched. They stay still when named. I stopped reading after that afternoon. I drove into town to ask questions. The same town I remembered from childhood, only quieter now. Fewer people. More closed storefronts dotted the diner. When I mentioned my father's name, the waitress stiffened. "You're staying at his place?" she asked. I nodded. She leaned closer. "You sleeping upstairs?" "No, good." That was all she said. Back at the house, I noticed something I'd somehow missed before. Behind the shed, half hidden by brush, was a narrow footpath leading uphill. It wasn't a trail exactly. More like repeated use had pressed the ground down just enough to suggest direction. I remembered the note. "Do not go uphill." I stood there for a long time, staring at it. That night, the footsteps came closer. Not on the ridge. On the slope just beyond the yard, I could hear breathing, slow, controlled. When I turned on the porch light, I saw nothing. But the sense of being observed pressed so hard it felt physical. Like weight on my chest. I slept with the lights on. On the fourth morning, I woke to knocking. 3 slow knocks on the front door. I looked through the window. No one there. When I opened the door, I found muddy footprints leading from the woods to the porch, and stopping inches from the threshold, as if whoever made them had refused to cross. The prints were barefoot. That was when I decided to leave early. I packed quickly, ignoring the pull of unfinished business, of unanswered questions. Some things don't need closure. My car wouldn't start. The battery was fine. Fuel fine. No warning lights. It simply refused to turn over. I tried calling for help. No signal. The footsteps started again. This time, more than one set. I grabbed my father's old shotgun from the closet. I didn't load it. I just needed the weight of it in my hands. I don't know how long I waited. Hours, maybe at some point. I realized the sounds weren't circling the house anymore. They were going uphill, one by one, like a procession against every instinct I had. I followed the sound to the edge of the yard. The footpath waited there. The trees beyond it were wrong. Too straight, too evenly spaced. The darkness between them deeper than it should have been. I took one step onto the path. Immediately, the forest went silent. No wind. No insects. No distant life. I took another step, and the ground behind me wasn't there anymore. Not gone, just different. The house was farther away than it should have been, smaller, like I was already retreating from it. I turned back. The path behind me had vanished. Panic surged, hot and immediate. I forced myself to breathe, to think. That's when I heard my father's voice, not calling my name, just speaking softly, like he used to when I was a kid and scared of storms. "Don't look straight at them," he said, somewhere uphill. "They don't like being known." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Shapes moved between the trees, tall, thin, not distorted, just unfinished, like people sketched too lightly and never filled in. They didn't rush me, they waited. I understood then what my father had done, why he'd stayed, why he'd written those notes. He wasn't trapped, he was maintaining something. The ridge wasn't just land, it was a boundary, and I had stepped past it. The pressure in my head built until my vision blurred. I smelled damp earth and rot and something older, metallic and wrong. I did the only thing I could think of, spoke my father's name. Out loud, every shape froze. The silence cracked. Like ice under stress, the path behind me reappeared. I ran. I don't remember reaching the house. I remember the car starting. I remember driving downhill without stopping, without breathing properly until the ridge was far behind me. When I reported everything later, no one denied it. They just said the ridge had been quiet for a while, that it needed someone local again. I sold the property, cheap. No disclosures sometimes. I dream of footsteps moving uphill. Sometimes I wake up knowing, with absolute certainty, that something followed me down. And if you ever hear someone tell you not to go uphill in the mountains, they're not being poetic. They're trying to keep the dark where it belongs. I didn't grow up afraid of the mountains. I grew up inside them. I was born in Western Virginia, in a town so small it barely existed unless you already knew where to look. One main road, a gas station that doubled as a grocery store, a post office that closed before lunch. The mountains weren't scenery to us. They were just there, like walls. When people talk about Appalachia from the outside, they make it sound mysterious or romantic. To us, it was work. Logging roads, old mines, weather that turned on you fast, places you learned not to ask questions about. My grandfather used to say, the mountains didn't mind people, as long as people minded the mountains. I didn't listen when I was 26. I took a contract job doing land surveying for a private company that specialized in rural properties. The pay was good, and most of the work was solo. I liked that. I was newly divorced, restless, and convinced that isolation was the same thing as peace. The assignment that changed everything was a week-long survey near the West Virginia-Kentucky border. No official address, just coordinates and a note that said, asterisk, asterisk, access via service road. Condition, unknown, asterisk, asterisk. The locals called the area Hollow Creek, though there was no creek anymore. Just a dry, stone-lined trench that looked like water had once fled it in a hurry. I parked at the end of a broken asphalt road and loaded my pack. GPS unit, notebooks, camera, enough food for several days. No cell service, but that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the gate. It wasn't locked, just closed. Heavy steel bars sunk into the ground, old and rusted, with a sign bolted to it that had been stripped blank by time. No lettering left, just the outline where words used to be. Someone had gone through the trouble of installing it. Someone had gone through the trouble of removing whatever it warned about. I stepped around it and followed the service. Rode into the trees. The farther I walked, the more wrong the forest felt. Not threatening, just managed. Like something had been maintaining it without understanding what it was supposed to look like. Trees grew in uneven clusters, leaving wide, empty corridors between them. The ground was strangely free of underbrush in places, then choked with it in others, like invisible lines had been drawn and obeyed. After about an hour, my GPS, GLITCHED, not shut down, not lost signal. It just started lagging, like it was thinking too hard about where it was. Coordinates flickered. Altitude numbers jumped wildly. I marked my starting point manually and kept going. By mid-afternoon, I realized something else. There were no animal sounds, no birds, no insects, no distant movement, just my footsteps and my breathing. When I stopped, the silence didn't fill back in. It stayed hollow. I found a flat clearing near the edge of one of the marked parcels and set up camp. As I worked, I noticed shallow grooves in the dirt around the perimeter, not tire tracks, too narrow. Two consistent paths, leading away from the clearing in multiple directions. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was scared, because my body refused to relax. Every time I drifted off, I'd jerk awake with the certainty that something had changed. Not moved, just adjusted. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps slow, bare pressing into dirt. They circled my tent once. Twice, I held my breath, listening for fabric to brush against fabric. For a zipper, for a voice, nothing by morning. The ground around my camp was marked with fresh footprints, adult-sized, barefoot, deep impressions. Like the person carrying them was heavier than they should have been. They stopped just short of my tent. I told myself it was a prank. Locals messing with an outsider. That explanation held until I realized the prints overlapped each other in impossible ways, as if the same foot had stepped in multiple directions at once. I broke camp early as I moved deeper into the survey area. I started seeing structures, not buildings, arrangements. Trees bent inward at the top, lashed together with wire so old it blended into the bark. Stones stacked into low walls that didn't enclose anything. Holes dug straight down into the earth, perfectly round, some of them deep enough that I couldn't see the bottom. Every one of them smelled wrong, damp, metallic, old. By the third day, my sense of time started slipping. My watch still worked, but the days didn't feel like days. Light lingered too long. Shadows stretched in directions they shouldn't. I marked points on my map that should have been miles apart, only to reach them in minutes. At one point, I followed a ridgeline that should have taken me north. When I checked my compass, it said I was walking south. I started talking out loud just to hear a human voice. That night, the footsteps returned. This time, they didn't circle. They stopped directly outside my tent. I heard breathing, calm, curious. Then, I heard something else. My name, spoken softly, incorrectly pronounced, like someone had learned it by watching my mouth move instead of hearing it spoken. I didn't answer. The voice tried again, closer, come out. I stayed silent until dawn in the morning. My tent zipper was open. I know for a fact I'd closed it. Nothing inside was taken, nothing disturbed, but the sense of violation was immediate and overwhelming. I decided to leave. I followed my marked route back toward the service road. After 3 hours of walking, I reached my own camp, the exact same, clearing out the exact same grooves in the dirt, except now there were more paths, and my original footprints were gone. That was when panic set in for real. I tried bushwhacking, climbing, anything to break the pattern. The terrain fought me at every turn. Slopes that should have been climbable crumbled. Vegetation snagged and tore at my clothes. Fallen trees blocked my way in places they hadn't existed minutes earlier. As the light faded, I smelled smoke. I followed it, desperate, convinced there had to be people. What I found was a fire pit, still warm, surrounded by objects, laid out carefully, my notebook, my spare batteries, a photo of my ex-wife. I kept folded in my wallet. They hadn't taken them. They'd examined them. I ran until my legs gave out. I don't remember falling asleep. I remember waking up on cold ground, surrounded by trees that leaned inward like they were listening. Figures stood just beyond the reach of the moonlight, not quite human, not quite wrong. They didn't move. They didn't need to. Understanding hit me all at once. This place wasn't lost. It was curated. People didn't disappear here. They were studied, mapped, learned. I screamed then. Not out of fear, out of defiance. The figures flinched. The ground seemed to loosen. I ran blindly, crashing through brush, ignoring pain, ignoring direction. At some point, the forest released me. I stumbled onto the service road at dawn, barefoot, bleeding, dehydrated, screaming until a maintenance truck stopped. When I tried to explain, the driver didn't look surprised. He just said, "You went past the old gate, didn't you?" I quit the job. I moved out of state. I avoid mountains now, but sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet in the wrong way, I swear I can hear bare feet moving just outside the edge of the light. Waiting, learning. And if you ever see a gate in the woods with a sin worn completely blanked around, some warnings don't fade, they're erased. I didn't mean to end up on that road. That's the part people always assume is a lie, but it isn't. I wasn't chasing a story, or hiking for fun, or looking for trouble. I was driving home from a funeral in eastern Tennessee, late October. Rain coming down hard enough to blur the windshield into streaks of white and black. My phone had been dead for hours. The radio cut out somewhere past the state line, leaving me alone with the sound of tires on wet pavement and my own thoughts. Around midnight, a detour sign appeared out of nowhere, orange, reflective, bent slightly, like it had been hit before and never fixed properly. Road closed. A hid local traffic on-lie slowed down, looking for another sign, another option. There wasn't one. Just trees on both sides and a narrow road disappearing into darkness. I told myself I was local enough. I turned. The road climbed almost immediately. Tight switch. No guardrails. The kind of road that feels like it was carved by hand and never meant to be driven in the rain. I kept my speed low, knuckles white on the steering wheel, telling myself I'd find a place to turn around soon. I never did. The road kept narrowing until the trees felt close enough to touch. Their branches arched overhead, forming a tunnel that swallowed my headlights. Fog rolled in, thick and sudden, like it had been waiting. That's when I saw the house. It sat just off the road, half hidden by trees, a single porch light glowing dimly through the mist. Old, 2 stories. Paint long gone from the wood, leaving it grey and splintered. A mailbox leaned near the driveway, its numbers scratched off. I drove past it. Less than a minute later, the road ended, not gradually. Just stopped. Asphalt giving way to mud and rock, blocked by a collapsed section that dropped away into darkness. No warning signs, no barriers. I sat there with the engine idling, rain ticking against the roof, heart pounding. Turning around meant backing up a narrow mountain road in thick fog on a slope. In the dark, I thought of the house. I reversed slowly until I reached the driveway and pulled in. The engine cut out as soon as I parked. That should have scared me more than it did at the time. I was just tired. The porch boards creaked under my weight as I walked up. The light flickered once, then steadied. I knocked once, twice, no answer. I knocked again, louder, from inside the house. Something moved, not footsteps, more like a shifting weight, furniture settling. I waited after a long moment. The door opened a few inches. A man stood behind it, face mostly in shadow, older, thin, eyes reflecting the porch light like an animal's. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I know," I replied. "My car died. I just need to use a phone." He stared at me for a long time. Too long. Then he opened the door wider. Inside, the house smelled like damp wood and old smoke. No electricity. Oil lamps provided weak pools of light that didn't quite reach the corners of the rooms. There was no furniture in the living room, just empty space and scuffed floorboards, like something heavy had been dragged back and forth repeatedly. "You can stay until morning," the man said, "but you don't leave the house tonight." "I don't think I have a choice," I said, trying to keep my tone light. He didn't smile. "There are rules," he continued. "You stay inside after dark. You don't go upstairs. And if you hear someone call your name from outside..." He paused. "You don't answer." I wanted to ask questions. I didn't, I agreed. He showed me to a small room off the kitchen. Bare mattress on the floor. One window covered by a thick curtain that smelled like mildew. He handed me a lantern and left without another word. I lay there listening to the rain, telling myself this was just mountain people being mountain people. Isolation makes folks strange. That's all. Sometime after midnight, the rain stopped. The silence that followed felt wrong, too sudden, too complete. Then I heard footsteps outside, slow, careful, circling the house. Not heavy enough to be boots, not light enough to be animals. Bare feet on wet ground. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped beneath my window. Something brushed against the glass, fingertips, testing. Then a voice spoke, soft and patient. "Hello." It wasn't threatening. That was the worst part. It sounded hopeful. I stayed still. The voice tried again. "Can you help me?" I squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering so hard it made my vision pulse. From somewhere else outside. Another voice answered, lower, closer. "Don't." The first voice went quiet. The footsteps resumed. Moving away, I didn't sleep. In the morning, the man was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in years. "You heard them," he said. Not asking, I nodded. "They come from the woods," he said. "They don't live there, they just Come through, who are they? I asked. He shook his head. Doesn't matter. I asked about the road, about my car. He sighed. It'll start now. It did. Before I left, he grabbed my arm. His grip was stronger than I expected. Don't stop, he said. No matter what you hear, no matter who you think you see, you don't stop, I promised. I drove away just after sunrise, fog still clinging to the trees. The road behind the house was suddenly clear, the collapse gone like it had never existed. About 10 minutes down the mountain, I saw someone standing on the shoulder, a woman, young, soaking wet, hair plastered to her face, one arm raised in a weak wave. I slowed instinctively. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were wrong, too still, too focused. Her mouth opened. She said my name perfectly. I didn't stop in the rearview mirror. I saw her step into the road behind me, and then she was gone. No sound, no movement, just empty asphalt and fog. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Who would believe it? I went back to my life, convinced that distance and time would dull the memory. They didn't. A year later, I found a muddy footprint outside my apartment door. Bare dot. Another year after that, I woke up to someone knocking softly on my bedroom window, third-floor apartment. Sometimes, late at night, when everything goes quiet in that same wrong way, I hear footsteps moving just beyond the light, and a voice that knows my name. If you ever take a mountain detour and find a house that feels like it's standing guard, instead of offering shelter, listen to it. Some places don't keep you safe, they keep you hidden. I took the night security job because no one else wanted it. That should have been enough of a warning, but I needed the money. I'd just moved back to Virginia after a failed marriage and a string of short-term jobs. My savings were thin, my pride thinner. When I saw the posting asterisk, overnight security guard, mountain facility, minimal duties, high pay, asterisk, I didn't ask many questions. The interview was over the phone. The man on the other end spoke calmly, professionally. He told me the site was an old industrial property in the Appalachian Mountains, shut down years ago. My job was simple. Sit in the guard shack, monitor cameras, log activity, and report anything unusual. Mostly wildlife, he said. Occasionally trespassers who don't know where they are. I asked why it paid so well. There was a pause, retention, he said. I started the following. Monday, the drive alone should have made me turn around. The paved road gave way to gravel, then dirt, then something closer to a scar cut into the mountain. No signs, no lights, just trees pressing in from both sides and fog hanging low, even though the forecast said clear skies. The facility sat in a narrow valley, surrounded by steep wooded slopes on all sides. Chain link fence, topped with rusted barbed wire, enclosed several long, windowless buildings and one small guard shack at the entrance. No lights were on when I arrived. I parked, stepped out, and the silence hit me immediately. Not quiet, absence. Even my footsteps sounded wrong. Like the sound didn't travel as far as it should have. Inside the guard shack was a desk, a monitor bank, a radio, and a binder labeled procedures. I flipped it open. Most of it was standard. Patrol schedule, camera locations, incident report forms. Then I reached a page titled Night Protocol. It was short. Do not leave the shack between 12 a.m. and 4 a.m. Do not acknowledge voices outside the fence. Do not use exterior floodlights unless instructed. If movement is detected on cameras 3, 7, or 11, log it only. Do not respond. I read that page 3 times. I told myself it was corporate paranoia. Old place. Liability fears. Maybe the land had a bad history. The first few hours passed slowly but normally. Cameras showed empty yards, tree lines swaying gently. Occasional deer near the fence. At 11:47 p.m., camera 7 flickered. The image didn't cut out. It smeared. Like the frame rate dropped and then snapped back. I leaned closer. Something had moved near the tree line, tall, to still now to be an ANMAL. I logged it and told myself it was a trick of light dotted midnight exactly. The radio crackled. Not a voice, just static, thick and heavy. I turned the volume down at 12:13 a.m. Camera 3 picked up motion, same thing. A shape near the fence, not crossing it, just standing close enough that the barbed wire cast shadows across it. I couldn't make out details. The night vision blurred anything too close. I logged it. At 12:30, I heard footsteps, not on gravel, not on metal, on dirt, slow, deliberate. Approaching the shack, I stayed seated, eyes fixed on the monitors, telling myself it was an animal, a bear, a person lost in the woods. Then, something knocked on the shack door once, not hard, just enough to be unmistakable. I froze, the binder. Instructions echoed in my head. Do not acknowledge voices outside the fence. The knock came. Again, then a voice spoke. Mister, it was close. Right outside the door, mail.com, slightly hoarse. I need help. My mouth went dry. The facility was miles from anywhere. No public roads. No reason for anyone to be here. I'm hurt, the voice said. Please. I didn't move. The voice sighed. That's okay, it said softly. I'll wait. The footsteps retreated. I didn't breathe normally again until nearly dawn. When my shift ended, the day's supervisor arrived without a word about the night. I tried to explain, but he stopped me mid-sentence. If nothing crossed the fence, he said, then nothing happened. I went home and didn't sleep. The second night was worse. At 12:02 a.m., every camera showing the tree line activated at once. Not movement alerts, manual repositioning, as if something was leaning into view. The shapes were clearer this time. Human silhouettes, multiple, standing just beyond the fence, heads tilted slightly. Bodies angled toward the shack, watching at 1:15 a.m. The radio clicked on by itself. Breathing came through the speaker, slow, curious, then whispering. Not words I could understand. Not language. Just the rhythm of speech without meaning. At 2:40 a.m., the shack lights flickered. The footsteps returned. This time, they circled the building. I heard fingernails drag lightly across the metal siding. Testing, double quotes. Why won't you look at us? A voice asked, different voice, younger, female. Maybe. I pressed my hands flat against the desk, nails digging into my palms to keep from shaking. At 3:17 a.m., camera 11 filled with a face, too close to the lens, distorted by night vision, eyes wide, unblinking, smiling. I logged it. My handwriting was barely legible. On the third night, I made a mistake at 12:11 a.m. Camera 7 showed one of the figures inside the fence. That wasn't supposed to happen. I stood up without thinking. The moment my chair scraped the floor, the footsteps outside stopped. Every monitor went black except one, camera 11. It showed the inside of the shack, me standing at the desk. I turned slowly. The door was still closed. The knock came from inside the walls, not loud, not aggressive, patient. The voice that followed sounded almost kind. "You're doing great," it said. "You can rest now." Something shifted behind my eyes. Pressure, dizziness. For a terrifying second, I wanted to open the door. I wanted to see them. I slammed my fist into the desk, grounding myself in pain. The monitors snapped back to normal. The rest of the night passed in silence. In the morning, I quit. The supervisor didn't argue. He didn't ask for paperwork. He just nodded and said, "That's about right." I left the mountains that day. I moved cities, changed jobs. It didn't end there. Sometimes, when I work late now, I hear a knock at my apartment door just after midnight. Once soft, when I check, no one is there. Other times, my security camera sends alerts showing movement in rooms I'm standing in, and every now and then, when the world goes quiet in that same empty way, my phone lights up with a call from a blocked number. I never answer, but the voicemail always comes. Through breathing, then a familiar voice. "You did such a good job watching us. They still need someone up there, and you already know the rules." I've never told this story all the way through. Not to my wife, not to the police, not even to myself, if I'm being honest. I've broken it into pieces over the years, shoved the worst parts into corners of my head where they wouldn't interfere with daily life. But the truth is, the mountains never let me forget. This happened when I was 32. I worked as a contractor for a utility company, the kind of job that sent you wherever infrastructure was old, neglected, or quietly failing. Most of the time it was boring. Replacing lines, checking remote relay stations, documenting equipment that hadn't been touched since the 70s. That's how I ended up in the southern Appalachians, assigned to inspect an old repeater station that sat high in the mountains on land the company technically owned but hadn't actively used in years. The locals called the area Grayson Spur, no town. No marker on most maps, just a name people used when they wanted to refer to that stretch of mountains without getting specific. I drove up alone in a company truck, following directions printed on a single sheet of paper. The GPS lost signal hours before I arrived. The road narrowed into gravel, then into dirt, then into something that looked like it had been carved more than built. The forest closed in around me. Tall trees, dense, their branches knit together overhead, blocking out most of the sky. Even in the afternoon, the light felt dim, filtered. The repeater station sat in a clearing that shouldn't have existed, perfectly circular. Trees cut back in a clean radius, their stumps old and dark with rot. At the center stood a squat concrete building with a metal door and no windows. A fence surrounded it, but parts of it had collapsed inward, as if something heavy had leaned on it repeatedly over the years. No wildlife, no birds, no insects, just wind brushing leaves together in a sound that reminded me of whispering without words. I parked and stepped out of the truck. The air felt heavier immediately, like I'd walked into a lower pressure zone. My ears popped. My chest tightened slightly. I told myself it was altitude. Inside the building, everything worked. Barely, but it worked. Old equipment humming steadily. Lights flickering in an irregular rhythm that made it hard to tell if they were failing or just old. I logged my inspection, took photos, and planned to head back down before dark. Then I noticed something carved into the concrete wall near the door. Not graffiti. Not vandalism. Names, dozens of them. Scratched deep, overlapping. Some crossed out. Some circled. Some repeated again and again in slightly different handwriting. Most of them had dates next to them. They weren't old dates. The most recent was from 3 years earlier. I took a photo and left. The drive back down took longer than it should have. The road seemed steeper, tighter. Switchbacks repeated themselves. I passed the same bent pine tree 3 times. Its trunk split by lightning and wrapped in yellow survey tape that fluttered weakly in the breeze. When I finally reached the bottom of the mountain, the sun was already setting. The town nearest to Grayson Spur wasn't much of a town. A gas station, a diner, a post office that closed early. I stopped for fuel and mentioned the repeater station. Casually to the clerk, her face changed immediately. "You shouldn't have been up there alone," she said. I laughed it off. "It's just an old utility site." She didn't smile back. "They don't maintain it anymore," she said. "Haven't in a long time. It's still active." She shook her head. "Not officially." I asked her what she meant. She slid my receipt across the counter and said, "People get confused up there." That was the end of the conversation. I stayed the night at a cheap roadside motel. I slept badly. Dreams full of half-heard voices and the sensation of being watched from just beyond where I could turn my head. At 3:12 a.m. I woke up to knocking. 3 slow knocks, not on my door. On the wall behind my bed, I sat up, heart racing, listening. Nothing followed in the morning. I found muddy footprints outside my room, bare. Leading away toward the mountains. I should have left the area entirely. I know that now. But the photo of the names kept bothering me. I told myself I needed to document it properly, report it to the company, make sure no one else was at risk, so I went back. This time, I arrived earlier. Morning fog still clung to the trees, thick and low. The clearing appeared suddenly, like the forest had stepped back to make room for it. The fence was more damaged than before, bent inward. The door to the building was open. I know it had been locked the previous day. I remember the resistance of the handle, the click of the mechanism. Inside. The lights were off. The hum of the equipment had changed. Not louder, not quieter. Just uneven, like a heartbeat skipping every few seconds. The names on the wall had grown. Fresh scratches overlapped the old ones. Some letters still dusted with concrete powder. One name sat apart from the others. Mine. I backed away slowly, pulse roaring in my ears. Behind me, something shifted. I turned. The doorway no longer led to the clearing. It opened onto trees, dense, close. Pressing in, I spun around. The opposite wall was gone too, replaced by forest, trunks standing impossibly close together, bark damp and dark. The building hadn't vanished. It had been absorbed. I stumbled forward, pushing through branches, tearing my sleeves on thorns that seemed to reach for me. The ground sloped downward sharply, but no matter how far I went, the forest never opened up. The light stayed dim. The air stayed heavy. I heard footsteps behind me, not running, walking, matching my pace. When I stopped, they stopped. When I turned, I saw shapes between the trees. Human outlines, but wrong in subtle ways. To still, to narrow, faces obscured by shadow that didn't match the direction of the light. One of them spoke, not loudly, not threateningly. "You came back," it said. The voice sounded like several voices layered together, slightly out of sync. "I shouldn't have. I said before I could stop myself." The shapes shifted. "You already did," the voice replied. I ran. The forest changed as I moved. Paths appeared where there had been none, guiding me forward. When I tried to veer off, the ground rose or fell sharply, funneling me back. I passed things that shouldn't have been there. A rusted truck half swallowed by earth. A child's sneaker hanging from a branch. A tent collapsed inward, its fabric shredded, with bones visible beneath. Not animal bones, human. I don't know how long I ran. Time stopped behaving normally. My watch spun uselessly on my wrist, seconds jumping forward and backward. Eventually, I reached the clearing. The repeater station stood exactly where it should have been, whole, intact. The door closed. My truck sat where I'd parked it. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined everything. Then I saw the fence, perfectly repaired, new, metal gleaming in the sunlight, and on the inside of it, hands gripping the wire. Dozens of them, faces, pressed close behind. Some were fresh, terrified mouths, open in silent screams. Others were older, calm, watching me with something close to relief. One man leaned forward. "You can still leave," he said, "but it has to be alone." I understood then. The station wasn't infrastructure, it was a boundary, a collection point, something that fed on people who noticed it too. Closely, I got in the truck. The engine started. As I drove away, I saw movement in the rearview mirror. One figure stepped back from the fence. My name scratched itself deeper into the concrete wall as I left. I reported everything. The company quietly removed the site from active records. My supervisor advised me to take extended leave. The file vanished. But sometimes, late at night, when the world goes quiet in that same hollow way, my phone lights up with a notification. No message, just a location ping. Grayson Spur, and I know with absolute certainty that the fence is holding for now, because the mountains remember who's been inside them, and they are patient. They always wait for you to come back.